Stephen Heyman wrote a very interesting section called The Dilemma of Modern First Amendment Theory. He said that he perceives inherent conflict between freedom of speech and the state's efforts to promote other social values. He said that there are three approaches that we could take in looking at First Amendment problems. The first one is the statist position, deferring to the government's power to regulate for the common good. Second, civil libertarian view, protecting the freedom of speech. The third approach would be one that would seek to balance free speech and state interests. So let's circle back for a minute. The statist view, it would allow the government broad power to regulate speech like it regulates people's conduct. It would give protection to social interests that could be injured by the freedom of expression, but little or no protection for our freedom of speech. The civil libertarian view, it would seek maximal protection for free expression against state power. But how do you identify limits to freedom of speech? We've mentioned before that some people believe we should have the freedom to express ourselves, but not 100% all the time. One example was that other people have the right to their reputation. So if you publish something that is false and damages another person's reputation, that perhaps should not be protected under freedom of speech. So how do you define limits of this freedom? Is it 100% absolute, or are there some limits sometimes? Some of these arguments establish priority of free speech over social interests in general, but don't demonstrate the priority of freedom of expression over our other rights. For example, democratic self-government depends on people having political free speech, but that political free speech depends on the individual's right to liberty of speech. And if individuals no longer have the right to speak what they wish, then those same individuals cannot participate in democratic self-government. How do you think that looks today? Do you think we are still able to participate freely? Or do you think we've been shut down in some areas? Just like individual and political free speech turned out to be interdependent, the same is true of free speech and our other rights. We have more rights than just the freedom of speech. They work together. They're part of a whole. There's the statist view, the civil libertarian view, and then that third approach, that of balancing. Trying to avoid the pitfalls of both statism and the civil libertarian view. Free speech and competing interests both have value, and both of these things should be protected, not sacrificed. But balancing all of this is very hard, because how do we balance free speech and state interests? They seem often very opposed. Some have tried to reduce competing values to common terms, like social welfare, so that they can be weighed out. But the term social welfare, how do you weigh that out? What does that mean? Free speech and other interests should be measured somehow to determine what result would most promote common good. But then again, common good is an indeterminate standard. We've got free speech, we've got these other interests over here. How do we balance all of this to form a whole? The author believes that there is a conflict between our freedom of expression and other fundamental rights of people, like dignity, equality, and community. He said the rights-based theory acknowledges what's most powerful in the absolutist approach to the First Amendment, its refusal to compromise principles that underlie free speech. But it does recognize that these principles justify protection of other rights. So even just within freedom of expression, there's so much disagreement about what it is, who has it, how far can it go. But it's also complicated by the fact that we have more than the right of free speech. There are other rights in other areas of life. And if all of us have all of the same rights, we have to find a way to balance all of this out and form a whole where we can all work together as much as possible. All of these videos in this series has been an attempt at giving you an overview of what the First Amendment is, how it came about, the English history of it, how that influenced the American view of it, how Americans formed these views of our rights, and now bringing it up to modern day, all of the disagreements about what these rights are. Again, it's always being discussed. What are these rights? Do we actually have them? Where did they come from? How much protection do they deserve?